There are 7 things that I did as a broke, aspiring creator that have allowed me to build a multiple 6-figure content agency and work with some of the top brands in the world. So in this video, I want to show you the problems I was facing at the time, what I did to kind of solve them, as well as the tangible action steps that you can take to get better response rates, get more clients on calls, land more brand clients, and ultimately get them better results so that they pay you every single month. And by the way, these things I'm about to show you in this video are complete non-negotiables. Like, it wasn't even an option, because if you want to be your own boss, then you got to be your own boss. So if you are not getting any clients right now, or you don't have enough clients, it usually boils down to 3 main problems. The first one is just not enough people know who you are. The second is that your skills aren't good enough to get you hired. And the third is that you can get people on calls, but you can't actually convince them to pay you money, which is a sales problem. So given those 3 problems, I personally started with the lowest hanging fruit, because I realized if I wasn't getting gigs, that's probably because just not enough people knew that I even existed. So if I could make more people aware that I existed and what I did, then I would likely have a better chance of landing more gigs. So that's why my first non-negotiable was sending 15 to 20 outreach messages every single day. And sometimes I even said a whole lot more than that, because volume negates luck. And the more I sent, the more opportunity I had to actually land a deal. And you may have just heard that and you're like, well, Nash, that sounds like it takes a lot of time. That would take hours. And you would be correct. Although you do get better with it over time, and it won't take you hours. It might take you like 30 minutes once you do it enough. But the reality is, if you can't find a few hours a day to devote to making your dream a reality, then I don't really know what to tell you. And business is work. Work takes time. So figure out how to make the time if you actually want to make this your job. So now that I got some people aware that I existed, that checked off the first problem. But that brought me to the second problem, is that I wasn't really confident enough that my work was good enough to actually get hired. So that's why I implemented my second non-negotiable, which was to study world-class content. I mean, think about it. How can you expect to compete with the best creators in the world if you're not creating at the standard that they're creating at? So me personally, I used to create pretty randomly. I would just kind of come up with random ideas and then throw something together and call it good. But then I realized something revolutionary. I realized that there were other people that had created content for brands similar to what I was trying to create that had actually gotten paid a lot of money for it. So if I could just find that content, study it, figure out why they got paid that amount, and then just go make a version of it myself, then I would have a much better chance of creating content that was actually good, that would actually get me hired. So what I did is I started looking for brands that were running viral campaigns. I would go on Instagram and see what was going viral. I would look at TV ads and I would analyze some of the frameworks. And then I would even go to the Facebook Ads Manager and I'd look up these brands, see what ads they were running, and even scroll back if they had been running an ad for more than 3 months or something like that. Obviously it was working because they were still running it. So I would take all these different pieces of content I had found and I would start analyzing them. I would look at the length, how long they were. I would look at the hooks. I would look at the storytelling structure. I would look at how they're mixing in different marketing messages and how they're, attracting their viewers and keeping people engaged. And what I realized after doing enough analysis is that a lot of these pieces of content had some commonalities. So I started to build frameworks around this stuff. And I knew that if I surrounded myself consistently with great content that people were being paid well for, then I would be able to absorb it. And these frameworks and these ideas and these hooks and all these storytelling structures would just become second nature, because I'd immediately be able to identify something that's good versus something that's, it won't work. So just studying and understanding the content is great, but it wasn't enough, because I needed proof that I could actually do it myself. And that's why my third non-negotiable is that I had to create something new every single day. Now, not every day was I making a brand project or working with a client. Sometimes it was just random personal projects that I was working on, but I wanted to make it a habit that I was being creative in some kind of way every single day. And when I say I created every single day, some of it was those personal projects, but a lot of it was stuff like spec ads or product shoots, or basically anything that could show that I had some experience. And I wasn't just randomly doing it. I was taking the frameworks that I learned in stage 2 and trying to apply those frameworks and those methods of creating videos and creating photos and looking at framing and looking at storytelling structures and trying to make my own versions of those, because I was modeling after something that actually worked. So now not only did I have proof of work that I could just throw on my portfolio, but more importantly, I had reps at creating these types of videos that are actually actively working and people are actively paying for. Great. So now that I was getting better at the content side of things, I was still struggling to get responses. So I was getting more consistent at sending these emails, but I was still getting ghosted, or a lot of people just saying, hey, we just do free trades. So that brought up a problem. And that's when I discovered the fourth daily non-negotiable, which is analyzing my marketing inputs. So I took a look at my pitch. Because I was sending out quite a few every single day, I started to collect some data in terms of how many people are responding, what my positive response rate was, and what percentage of people that I sent an email to actually booked a call. So I could look at these metrics, and then now I have an actual number that I can improve on. And to be very honest, when I first started to do this, it was absolutely horrible. Like every percentage was pretty much zero because I think my first 127 emails were I was either ghosted or just like no response. So at that point, I had to ask myself, okay, what's the first level of this? I just have to get someone from not responding to me to actually responding to me. So how do I optimize for this? So I would look at my subject line, I would look at my message, I would look at my CTA in the pitch, and I would be like, what is every single possible reason that somebody would look at this email and not respond to me? Now, literally just write it out. Like, the subject line sucks. Okay, what would be a better subject line that I can try out? Or the CTA is like way too much friction and like no one wants to respond to this. So like, how can I make it an easier CTA? And I would optimize those things and I would figure out what would be a better way to approach it. And then I would start implementing it. And then once I did, I would get more data and see what worked, what didn't, and then I'd optimize for the things that actually worked. So now at this stage, I started to get responses, but the responses wouldn't turn into actual calls. So I had to figure out how can I turn this response into a call and what was the things that were holding them back from scheduling that call, and then analyze that and figure out what I could do to get them on a call. So what you start to realize is it's really just a bunch of science experiments put together, and then eventually you figure out a thing that works. And just as an aside, like if you want to get people on calls, offer them some kind of value up front for free, and that will get people on calls. But there was a problem because I didn't actually know what was valuable and what would incentivize these people to get on calls. Like literally the only thing that I knew is that they sell rooms and that they make money off of selling these rooms. And I know this is a shocker, but it turns out there's a lot more to it. So that's why I made my 5th non-negotiable to do some industry homework. So personally, I always want to know just as much, if not more, than the client about their own personal business, because then I look like an expert that actually knows what I'm talking about. So therefore they would be more inclined to pay me money. But as I said, I didn't really know much about the hotel industry. So I had to do a deep dive and figure out as much as I possibly could. So I learned about the terminology, the lingo that they use. I learned about things like occupancy rates. I also learned about the customer journey, like how most people find hotels in the first place and why they would be inclined to book one versus the other. I learned about how the competition works and how hotels stand out. I learned about some of the pain points. I also learned about upsells and how they make additional money besides just the room rates. And ultimately, I figured out the bottlenecks. And it's these bottlenecks that were so crucial because I was able to expose those to the clients and then sell the content as the solution to fix that bottleneck. So now I was starting to become more and more educated about the market. So I was switching up my pitch. So now I was starting to book more and more calls with prospects. But there's a problem because there's only so much that you can learn from blogs and just like industry newsletters. So what I found is that I would get on these calls and I would look like a complete amateur to all of these different seasoned hotel marketing managers that have been in the industry for years. And they would just look at me like I was completely clueless, which is obviously not a great way to get hired, which is why I instituted my 6th non-negotiable, which is to actually talk to the market. So like I said, I was doing a lot of research on blogs, newsletters, that kind of stuff, and it definitely helps with my initial knowledge of the industry. But when I got on these calls, I realized that they were talking a language that I didn't really understand. So I wasn't really able to even properly pitch anything because I didn't understand how I could actually help them. So as you can imagine, I didn't really close any deals for my first 27 sales calls. So I started to shift focus and I was like, well, if I don't know how to actually pitch and sell this, then maybe I can start asking questions to get more insight in terms of what clients actually want, what they need, what they've maybe tried in the past, what they don't like, and start to compile a list of all these different things that are maybe commonalities between a lot of different hotels. So when I booked these calls, obviously my goal was to close them as a client, right? Like I don't go into there just like not wanting to close them. But what I realized is that I can't close them unless I know how to effectively sell them content. So although I didn't close those first 27 sales calls, I actually got a much more valuable thing than the dollars that they would have paid me. I got free industry insight that I can use as leverage for the rest of my career. So what I did is I started taking notes on all these things. I found the commonalities between all these different hotels, what sucked, what they didn't like, what they wish was better. And then I started to find solutions of how I could pin my content to actually solve those problems that the brand was saying sucked. So that was great. I was learning tons of new information about the industry and also how I could actually position my content to solve the problems they were facing. But I still hadn't closed a client yet. So quick story, when I was in high school, I played football, and the day after our game, we would always watch game film and we would kind of analyze it, and we would pause, we'd watch the slow motion, all this kind of stuff to realize what we did wrong, what we could do better to fix it, and then ultimately what we can implement the next week to actually win the game, or at least get better results on certain aspects of the game. So I took that concept of watching game film and applied it to my sales calls. And that's why my 7th and final non-negotiable was to watch game film. So to be honest, I didn't have sales calls every single day. Like I would have maybe 1 or 2 a week or something like that. So whenever I wasn't on a sales call, I would watch the game film because I would record my sales calls so that I could rewatch them. And I would sit there with the Google Doc open and I would just just write down things that I thought I did well, things I thought that could be improved. I would write down things that I said and look at the client's body language and how they responded to it. And if they responded well, I was like, okay, great, that was a good line. Maybe I'll continue doing that. Or if I said something and they looked like they were disengaged or not interested, then I would take note of that. Like, okay, maybe I don't say that thing. And I would start to realize that certain tonalities, certain things I said performed better than others. And I would start to optimize for those things. So every new call I got, because I took those notes and I was learning from it, I was able to implement those things. And over time, I was able to develop an entire sales framework around this, which I now call the target framework. But it was entirely based off of all these conversations I had with industry experts about what their problem point is, what actually resonated with them, and how I could pitch it in a way that they would actually be interested in working with me. So I started to make these incremental improvements over time, and eventually, after doing it enough, I finally closed my first high-ticket client deal at $5,000. Now, the coolest part was actually that now, since I had been consistent in the 7 things of consistently reaching out to 15 to 20 clients a day, of studying world-class content, of consistently creating that content so I knew what worked, of analyzing my marketing metrics so that I could optimize my messaging, of doing industry homework and understanding more about the industry and even talking to industry experts and reviewing game film, to the point where now that I had this client and I knew exactly what problem they had, I knew exactly how to solve that problem with content, and I knew exactly what content would perform the best for the client and get them the best results so that they would want to pay me month after month because they got great results. So those are the 7 things that I implemented to start getting more brand deals. But if you want to know exactly what to sell them, check out this video here where I break down the exact offer of how you can build an entire 6-figure industry with just 2 clients.